Okay, so this is the second class of the 101 Practical Beekeeping class course, and we are going to go over some techniques, talk a little bit about what we're planning to do today, and then after we do some work in the classroom, we're going to head out and go check out some hives. So today we're going to be reviewing the basic of hive maneuvers and why, and we're going to be doing the hands-on of lighting and keeping a smoker going, a quick inspection, although we may not get to that, doing things with boxes, doing things with frames, draping in quiet boxes. So why go dry? This is for when you're present. It's better to juggle at least 2 pins before adding an axe. So learn to maneuver the equipment around, learn to keep the smoker going, and then we can do something with actual bees in the boxes. Better to practice moving equipment smoothly, efficiently, not getting stung, not squishing bees. It's important to work on things like planning, communication, and execution, especially when you're working with a bee buddy. And dry boxes are lighter, so you can work out the mechanics of how to lift and move and carry without actually throwing your back out. And then practicing keeping your smoker going for the duration so that you have it there ready to go if and when you should actually need it. So we're actually going to be going over what is the hive inspection, why is it done, and how to do an inspection. So the purpose is to identify existing or potential problems in the hive through your observations. So you go in, you see what you see, and you learn what's actually happening with the bees. Before you do an inspection, you want to be prepared, have all your gear, have a plan in mind. You want to make sure that you have some way of taking notes about what you're seeing. It's good to go back over the notes that you took from before so that you kind of have an idea of where you were at last time, and if there were any specific techniques that you actually will be needing to do, you can kind of map those out in your head. If you don't know what the technique is, then you can go and look it up and or ask questions or see if you can help your mentor do whatever the thing is in advance of doing it for yourself with your own hives. And if there's certain things that you're going to be doing, you want to make sure that you have all the equipment that you need. For instance, if you were going to be doing a mite check or something, then you might want to make sure that you have everything you need in order to collect the bees and process them however you're doing it, and then actually check the count for the mites. So before you actually enter the hive, you should always do some environmental observations. This can be done on the way to the hive, and not only is it going to give you a lot of great information about what is going on with the bees prior to invading their space, but it will also help to bring you into a position of being present so that you're able to move calmly and with awareness and in harmony with the bees. So as you're approaching the hive, you should be thinking about what's going on with the weather. What's blooming? Is it windy? Is it cool? Is it warm? What direction is the wind coming from? What's the humidity? Is there mist? Rain? What does it smell? What does the air smell like? Is there cloud cover? What's the slant of the sun? Are there a lot of sounds or vibration? Was the neighbor just mowing the lawn just 5 minutes ago? Or, was my partner out there weed whacking around the hives earlier today? What's going on with the water conditions? Is there dew? Are you going early? Is there mud? Was there rain last night? Standing water? How is that in relation? How is it located in relation to the hives? All manner of things. So you should becoming present to what's going on, and not just becoming present in sort of a vapid, mindless way, but in a mindful way of taking in all the sights and sounds and smells and vibrations. So if it's cool, then you should be thinking about how you're going to move and maneuver the equipment around so that for the most part you're not going to be breaking up the brood box cluster, and that you're not going to be leaving, if you do take breed out, that you're not going to be leaving it out for any extended period of time. Chilled brood is almost always a condition that is the fault of a careless beekeeper. So if it's cool, or if it's sunny but there's wind, which is bringing down the wind chill, then just be aware of that before you go into the hive. Never open a hive below 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is a rule of thumb. There are times when you may violate this, but as this course is for beginning beekeepers, we'll go by rule of thumb, and then we can learn later how to violate that in a way that it's not going to hurt the bees. So don't leave the hive open for very long unless it's actually quite warm, comfortable for you without a jacket. So when you actually arrive at the hive with all your gear and your plan and your note-taking equipment and everything is ready to go, and you have become aware of what's going on environmentally as you are approaching the hive, now you're ready to actually look at the hive. So this is a great opportunity to look at the entrance and see what's happening there. What are the bees doing? What are the bees doing in this colony compared to another one that might be right next to it? Are they bearding? What does that even mean? Bearding means that they're sort of hanging on to each other, hanging on the front of the box so that they can cool down because maybe it's too warm. At that point, you want to definitely make sure that they have plenty of water nearby somewhere, because if they're bearding, then they're also going to be looking to cool the hive down, and they need water in order to do evaporative cooling, like a swamp cooler. Do I see any robbing behavior, or are the bees like feeling kind of aggressive? Like, are they pinging me before I actually get to the colony? Are they buzzing me? What does the sound of the hive bring to mind? Does it seem like peaceful and sort of bzz, bzz, or does it seem like uproarious, like zzz? It's a lot of information that you can gather just by listening to what's going on from the outside. And then what are the bees bringing in pollen? Is there a lot of entrance activity? Are they doing orientation flights? Are they cleansing flights? Are they cleaning out the hive? Are they dragging out dead bees? What's happening? And then take a good solid whiff from the outside, and that might give you a little bit of an indication if there's anything going on with the hive before you even open it up. Okay, so as you begin, you're going to work the hive from the back. You never work the hive from the entrance side of the hive, which is considered the front. So you're working the hive from the back. Make sure that the area is clear of tripping hazards. You put something down and you make a note to yourself that it's there, but in the heat of the moment, it's easy to forget that the thing is there, and then you can trip over it. And if you happen to be moving a box full of bees at the time that you do your tripping, you might just fall down and then drop a whole box full of bees on yourself. So they're not going to like that, and you're not going to like that either. So um, just be aware of making sure there's no tripping hazards before you really get going. And then smoke them, don't choke them. So you've lit your smoker, you've made sure that the smoke is cool and not a hot smoke. And then you want to just give them a little bit, puff, puff, and then wait. Then you're going to pop the top. So you might need to use your hive tool to kind of dig under the edge and use some leverage to pop it open. And you want to open it away from you. So if you're standing at the back of the hive, you're going to lift the front of the lid first so that when the bees fly out, they fly out away from you. And then you're going to place the top down, top down. turn it so the top is facing down, and set it so that the top of the top is on the ground, or the hive stand, or the table, or whatever you're using as a place that you're going to be setting any equipment that you pull off the hive at this point. Open the inner cover. So this might be where you make a little pop the propolis seal. You might do a puff puff. You might do a puff puff in the hole in the top of the inner cover, or if you have a screened inner cover, through the screen. And again, just kind of wait. And then take a nice whiff once you pop that inner cover top off, and see what you're smelling. Smell what you're smelling. And then flip the inner cover over and nest it inside of the lid. A peer review. So you're going to peer down inside and see what you can see. And look down in between the frames. So you're not even moving anything at this point. You're just observing what can be seen without moving anything. Take a note of cluster or nest location. So how many frames of bees are there? How many frames are seem to be fully populated? And are there any honey stores up in the corners or all the way down? You can sort of see, because the honey stores usually are built out. Okay, so in your mind, you don't necessarily need to do this with a pen, because quite frequently you'll end up rearranging the order of the frames eventually anyhow, so it's no point in writing anything on the frames. But in your mind, order the frames or number the frames from right to left. Now, if you were looking at the front of the hive, this would be reading it properly. Normally, like we're used to with the English language, we read left to right. But because we're standing at the back, the numbering is in reverse. So you're going to number your hive in your mind, your frames from 1 through 10, or 1 through 8, depending on, or 1 through 5 if you're running a nuke. If you're running 8s, it's 1 through 8. 1 through 10 if you're running a 10 frame. If you're running a long laying, well, you have to do more counting. All right, so you're going to remove the first frame, and you're going to do this by selecting the second frame in. So it's either going to be frame 2, 9, or 7. The queen is not usually on an outer frame, or the second position frame. It's always good to check and be cautious, but one of the reasons that we're removing this frame is the ones on the very edge are often difficult to remove, because they'll build a bridge comb between the frame and the box. And any further into the heart of the hive, and you might discover that you've removed a frame that has the queen, and then you just have to hurry up and put it back. So if you remove a second position, 7th or 9th, depending on if you're running 8s or 10s, then this is a good frame to take out to give yourself a little room. So you use your hive tool or a frame grip to lift and grasp the frame. So you're going to use your hive tool to push the outermost frame over into the space that should be left because you've equalized your frames, meaning you've pushed all the frames together in the middle and left an equal space on either side. And so now you're going to use that equalized space by using the leverage of the Hive tool to maneuver that first frame, or the 8th or 10th frame, the outermost frames, out into that space that you left when you equalize the frames. And what this does is it gives you a little bit of room right around that second position frame. So then now you can use your Hive tool to leverage that second position frame, or 9th or 7th position frame, into the middle of the space that is now created because you moved the outer frame all the way to the edge. And this gives you just a little extra room so you can pull up that frame without rolling bees, so that you're not potentially going to be damaging your queen or anything else. So this is when you use the J-hook, if you're using a J-hook, to get underneath the edge of the frame, the dog of the frame, on the outside of the ears of the frame, and use the leverage of the Hive tool to pull up the end of the frame. Then you're going to loop your finger underneath, shift the Hive tool to the other hand, and again you're going to use the J of the J-hook to reach underneath the dog of the frame on the outside of the ears and lift that side of the frame. So then now you have the frame is free from all the propolis and stickiness that had it held in place, and you should be able to lift that frame up with some degree of ease. So hold the frame over the open hive. You want to make sure that you're doing, like, lift the frame out and then turn. You want to lift the frame straight up and hold it over the hive and look for the queen, because you're going to set this frame on the outside of the hive, and you don't want to set the frame on the outside of the hive if there's a queen on it. So look at both sides of the frame. Now you're looking for the queen, young brood that could chill. And then you're going to place this frame on a hanger or lean it against the front corner of the hive so that any young bees, if they want to run off of the frame, they can just run back in the front entrance of the hive. Okay. So when you're doing an inspection, you're looking for the sign of the queen, which is eggs or young larvae. It's not necessarily the queen herself. Sometimes you see her and sometimes you don't. If you see a sign of the queen, if you see eggs, you know that she's been there within, the last couple of days. If you see young larvae, you know she's been there within 3 days. You're also looking at the brood pattern. Is it a nice solid pattern, or are there some spots? Is there something going on with the queen? Or are there bees emerging from the original pattern and she hasn't gone back and filled it back up again? Lots of questions to start asking yourself. This is all stuff that you will have learned a little bit about in your short course, or the 100 level. So, resources. You're looking to see if there's honey, nectar, or pollen. Signs of pests and diseases. Swarm impulse. So this might be not queen cups, but queen cells on the very bottom of the frames. It could also be that the pollen that is stored begins to look a little bit shiny. Instead of sort of dull and matte, it might start to look a little bit shiny. That's a good indication that there might be some swarming thinking about happening. So, and then queen issues. So we talked a little bit about brood pattern, whether she's present or not present. So those are some ways to tell if you may or may not have a queen issue. All right, so hive acrobatics. There are a number of ways that the frames and boxes can be moved around within the colony. Frames can be moved by rotating them, checkerboarding them, stovepiping them. Boxes can be reversed, supered, or under supered. It's all pretty straightforward, but we're going to go through it real fast so that we can go outside and do it. All right, so why are we doing this? Why are we rotating outer frames inward? Bees will often ignore outer frames, making an even brood pattern or honey distribution helps to kind of keep things consistent throughout the hive. Once you have all of the frames sort of, or 75–80% of the frames kind of drawn out and uniformly drawn out across the box that you're currently working on, then you can think about adding another box. Supports efficient comb construction, encourages better resource allocation, and avoids unused space at the edges of the hives. And that is exactly where a lot of pests will like to lurk. So if you can make sure that that space is being used instead of underutilized and creating a vacuum so that pests can move in and harass your bees, then you're ahead of the game. And then, yeah, less room for pests. All right. So during inspections, when undrawn outer frames are noticed and all of the more inner frames are drawn, that's a good time to rotate them if there's not any counter indications to it. Right sizing the hive, so when most of the frames are well drawn, and you want to get those other frames drawn. In early spring and summer, when they're naturally building comb, is a good time to do it. And then when expanding the colony. So when and why not to. When the colony is weak or struggling, now is not the time to give them extra room. You want to make sure that you're focusing on supporting their growth, which is probably feeding them and taking away equipment. When bees are already crowded, if you do certain things, it may make them feel like they have less room as opposed to more room. So instead of dropping these undrawn frames in between drawn sections that are already filled with brood and food, you might end up being better off dropping drawn but empty frames in between there to give the queen the sensation of having lots of space. Open floor plan. So rotating the frames becomes much less important than giving them space. So you may give them space by giving them lots of drawn comb that's ready to go, or you may give them an entire new box on top, potentially below, but usually on top. Or you may end up deciding that now is the time to split the colonies. Now, just because you split them doesn't mean you can't merge them back together at a later date if it becomes advantageous to you and the bees to do so. So during the nectar dearth, so this is a time when there is no food for them to use to convert into wax. If they have nothing to work with, you're just going to aggravate them. And it can be stressful for them because now they've got these weird gaps in the middle of their nest and they can't do anything about it. So if the brood nest is already established, never split the brood area. This is, again, a rule of thumb. There may be times that you may learn later how to violate this in a safe and thoughtful manner, but rule of thumb, never split the brood area. Chilled brood can result, you might disrupt the laying or end up with an uneven brood area. And then late in the season, bees shift their focus to winter prep, storing feed, feeding fat little bees to get them up and running so that they can live a long time, work hard, die very old. And they're going to be thinking a lot more about how they're laying out the resources that they're working with, and not wanting to think about trying to draw all that extra work of trying to draw some stuff out. So let's just have a quick visual of this. For some people, this is very helpful. This is a technique that you're going to be doing. This is, again, rotating the outer frames inward. You're going to be doing this in spring, potentially in summer, definitely not in winter. and probably not in fall. Potentially, but probably not. Okay. Now, this is, again, specific to the Mid-Atlantic region, and if you're in a different region, you may have a different annual schedule. So, this is how it's done. Identify the frames that are undrawn. Ah, look, these are all undrawn, and these ones are nicely drawn. So let's do something about these outer frames. So look, we closed that equalization gap. We gave ourselves a little room so we could pull up this frame. We put this frame in the middle and pushed it over. Now we're going to push all the frames together again. Make sure that the frames are all equalized in the middle. And look, they drew it out so nicely. You want to avoid splitting the brood nest if possible. All right, so checkerboarding. Here we have another technique. Alternate empty and drawn out super frames. It's usually mostly for supers because you're not usually going to be checkerboarding in the brood box. All right, so if you do end up moving some frames out of the brood box, it could help with swarming. If you're doing this, then you want to make sure that you're putting fully drawn frames accessible and ready for the queen to do her thing. You don't want to be doing that if it's too chilly, because splitting up the brood box will mean that the bees are going to have a hard time covering everything and keeping everything warm enough. Keeps bees focused on working rather than leaving, so it could potentially help to disrupt a pre-swarm impulse, and then encourage upward expansion. So guides bees to build comb and store honey in the upper supers. And you can use it to optimize honey production by ensuring that the bees are using the space efficiently. And you can use this technique as a great way, especially if you're doing cut comb honey or you're using wax foundation, to get your bees to draw out nice straight combs. So you'd put the undrawn combs in between nice straight well-drawn combs and alternate them, and that way the bees will be drawing out those new frames to the exact specifications of the previous frames, nice and straight. I think we're about to look at how checkerboarding is done. When early spring is a great time to do this before the main nectar flow starts. Helps redirect bee energy to storage rather than swarm prep. And then when expanding the hive, it encourages comb building in new supers. And then when preventing swarming, disrupt the sense of overcrowding and quell the swarm impulse. And then if you're using, again, the wax foundation or the foundationless natural wax to get them to draw it out straight. So don't do this if you have a weak colony, or if the dearth is on, or in the middle of the brood nest. Under almost every circumstance, rule of thumb, don't disrupt winter stores by putting empty combs or undrawn combs in between. Checkerboarding can be done with drawn or undrawn combs, depending on the purpose for doing it. You definitely don't want to be doing it in winter. Probably most of the time I'm going to be doing it in spring, some maybe in summer, and possibly in fall. Okay, here we go. This is how it's done. Pay attention, boys and girls. Identify fully drawn or capped honey frames, remove alternating fully drawn or capped honey frames, and insert foundation empty frames, meaning drawn but nothing in them, frames into their place. Okay, so we're pulling out these empties. We're redistributing these nicely drawn frames. This is great in your honey supers. And replacing those undrawn frames. Okay, so stove piping Stovepiping is essentially a way to sort of encourage the bees to move up. Sometimes out of sight is out of mind, and the bees may think, oh, well, I don't know what's up there because I've never been up there. So you may give them all the space in the world, and they may not know that they have it, unless you give them an incentive to go up. Oh, there's something up here. So this is a way of sort of getting the brood or the honey to align above, creating columns across multiple hive bodies so that the bees will move up. All right, so encourages expansion to upper box, creates nectar storage away from brood nest. So if you're doing this, you have to remember nectar takes up 10 times the space of honey. So if you have a whole bunch of new nectar coming in and that hasn't been fanned down and dried out yet, it's also probably happening at the same time that the queen is trying to ramp up bee production. And so you may have like cross purposes and conflicting interests in storage of nectar and placement of brood. So if you give them the stovepiping thing, they'll think, oh, I have plenty of room to store all this nectar over here. And then that leaves the queen her brood nest to do what she needs to do. So create nectar storage away from the brood nest. Reduce the swarm bin pulse. Congestion crowds the queen, triggers swarm. Encourage wax production and comb building again. And then channel excess carbs to build comb. Bees focus on drawing comb instead of swarming. Stovepiping the brood. So this is a great time. Spring buildup, rapid colony expansion, strong nectar flow, helps the bees manage their nectar income efficiently. And for new colonies or packages where you want them to actually get into that second box kind of quickly. In swarm prevention strategies, keep space open for queen for laying. And when bees have high carbohydrate intake, directs energy to building wax instead of swarming. So lots of ways to quell the swarm impulse without necessarily having to make a split. And we don't like to break up the brood nest because we don't want chilled bees. So be very thoughtful about what's happening with the weather, what's happening with the nest, and how you're going to do it. So let's have a look at when not to. All right. Do not stovepipe the brood chamber during a nectar dearth, if not feeding. If nectar flow is low, moving frames can stress the colony. In weak colonies, they may struggle to maintain both brood chambers, and then late in the season could disrupt their winter prep. And if the queen is not expanding, if the queen is not actively expanding, then if you do this, it just puts you out of that right-sized category. Okay, so here we go. Assess the brood chamber for stored nectar. Moved cap brood frames from lower box to upper brood box directly above the existing brood area. So you're keeping the brood nest together, you're just making it more vertical. Push the frames of the lower box together. Check that you have enough bees to cover all the frames everywhere. You want to avoid isolating any eggs or larvae. Add anti-drawn comb foundation to the edges of the brood chamber. And then you want to make sure that it's working the way that you thought it was going to work. Don't do this during the dearth. The colony may not be strong enough to manage changes in a weak colony, requires a healthy bee population to care for brood, or during fall or winter, because this could cause chilling. So all right, so when are you likely to end up doing this? Not in winter. Oh, probably in spring. Possibly in summer. Maybe in fall. And what does it look like? All right, so they've drawn out all this, then this is all full of brood. And now it's time to add space. These guys need space, so you're going to pull out these couple of central frames that have brood on them. You're going to bring everything back together. Drop these empty frames in on the outer edge. The reason that we're doing this is because we're not breaking up the brood nest. At some point we may end up rotating those outer frames inwards, but we're doing one thing at a time. So we're going to put that next box on top. We're going to drop those 2 drawn frames right in the middle over the top of the brood box so that the bees can cluster around them, and then we're just going to fill in the rest of the space with either drawn and empty or undrawn frames. All right, so moving boxes around, aka hive bodies. So we're going to do some reversing, managing the brood nest placement to prevent swarming, supering up, adding honey supers on top, supering under, getting the bees to actually go ahead and move to the next super instead of thinking that they've run out of space. All right, so at the top of brood boxes are swapped, top and bottom, sorry, brood boxes are swapped in early spring to prevent congestion. Now, often by the end of winter, the queen has moved up and she's kind of hitting the roof. So if you, and the bottom box may be completely empty. So at that point, you can swap out the bottom box for the top box. And all of a sudden, she has a whole ballroom to go dance in. So, making her feel like she has plenty of room for expansion and balancing the resources throughout the hive. So it's great to do this in early spring. After the winter, when the bees have moved all the way up, sometimes they'll move back down naturally and not feel congested to the point that they're going to swarm. But it depends on the bees. It depends on the weather. Sometimes it's better to just go ahead and take matters into your own hands so that you can be sure what's happening. Okay. So inspect the hive and locate the brood nest. If everybody basically is up top, and remember, be careful not to split the cluster. So cluster is here in hives, hive bodies C and B. So we're going to pull out hive body A, drop C and B down. What you'd actually do is remove C and B, set them to the side, pull out A, put C and B back together again, and then bring back A and drop it in on top. Ta-da! Now they've got plenty of room to expand! All right, so supering up. Supering up is what it sounds like. You're putting a super on top. Why? Adding honey supers makes more room for more honey. Bees naturally will move up to store honey above the brood nests, and this helps reduce congestion in the hive. You're going to do this during the nectar flow, when they need more storage, when the super below is about 70% full. And this is going to be done by making sure that most of the frames are drawn, and then 75% full. Place a new empty super on top of the full one. Ensure there's a queen excluder if you're using one. Super up. Mayish. Ta-da! All right, supering under is what it sounds like. You're going to slip a new super underneath a super that's already there with honey in it. encourages the bees to draw comb faster. They don't like empty space, so they're going to use the resources that they bring in to draw comb instead of storing the nectar, so you can get them to draw out some stuff. Prevents brood congestion by creating a clear nectar storage area, or gives them something to do with the nectar until there's a storage area in which they can store it. And then you're going to do this if the bees are ignoring an empty super on top. Remove the top honey super, set it aside, place the new empty super directly above the brood, and return the full super to the top. Here we go. There shouldn't be actually, this is not a brood nest, this is just a bunch of bees. I need to redo that slide apparently. All right, so, okay, when are we doing this? We're doing this when there's actually, okay, nothing is happening in winter. Spring is definitely going to be the time when you're doing most of your reversing, and then summer, late spring, early summer, during the nectar flow is when you're going to do most of your supering. You may, if there's a late nectar flow, a fall nectar flow, get that second nectar flow, you may end up doing some supering then too. So, you need to work on your initial buildup to encourage comb production, increase brood production, and available food supply. So basically, you need to get them, if you are starting a colony, you need to get them building fast. Frames 90% drawn in box 1. Go ahead, throw that next box on. Rotate the outer frames to get those drawn. Feed 1-to-1 syrup, so that's 1 part sugar to 1 part water. No fancy sugars, no organic sugars, no just straight plain old cane sugar. And protein. So this can be potentially a brewer's yeast patty, or a store-bought protein source, or a store-bought pollen patty. Do not just buy pollen off of the internet and create patties with it. If you do this, you might be introducing all kinds of pests, parasites and diseases into your colony. So, feeding new hives, working on getting them to grow up. If you have a package, 3 pounds of bees and a queen, you have to be prepared to feed them all summer. Both are 1-to-1 and protein. And then if you have nukes or splits, you're going to feed until there's available forage and they have enough drawn wax to start storing stuff. And you're going to feed them when the dearth. When we get into to the end of summer, and we're thinking about whether we need to feed our bees or not feed our bees. In the mid-Atlantic region, you probably should feed your bees, at least to ensure that they have stored food around the cluster. So you definitely want to make sure that they're storing food around the cluster. Now, if you are giving them back honey that you took from them earlier in the year, like if you had a full super of honey and you pulled it at the end of, right before the dearth hit, and you stored it for them so that it's not all full of bugs or whatever, you still want to feed them to get them to backfill around the brood nest as the brood nest contracts, as fall starts. And then after they've completely backfilled around the brood nest, you can either give them the next super and give them, plenty of 2-to-1 or even a little bit thicker so that they can store that, or that's when you would give them back that honey super that you took away from them. Otherwise, what they'll do is during the dearth, they'll just eat up the whole super of honey, and then they won't have any winter stores. So Okay. Let's go outside and play with some bees.